All right. I think we're ready to kick things off. Again, Don, we're going to focus on you for the first couple of questions about your business. Can you share the story behind AR Homes, how it has grown into the business that it is today, leading the luxury home building industry?
Yeah, so we were founded in 1953. So the Art Ruttenberg, our original founder, the family was in dry goods in the Chicagoland area, so upper Midwest. And the legend is had thought about getting into home building. And the family went to Clearwater, Florida, found 10 home sites. They claim at $1,000 a lot, so $10,000. They called the young Art Ruttenberg and said, "We're in home building now, send your contribution down." And then Art followed the contribution down to Clearwater and learned how to build homes by checking out a book from the library about how to frame homes. And then asking the trade partner who was on site who follows them. And that's how he bootstrapped his way into new home building. And so he had a brother named Charlie. So you have Ruttenberg Homes, Art's company, and you have Charlie's company called Imperial. And as those companies grew, they merged and formed in its day the largest publicly traded home building company, which was called US Home. And Art served as the CEO of that company. And they claim that after about 18 months, he decided to depart because he didn't like to report to a board of directors, which is something I can relate to. But here I am. So, Art then went off and did a number of JVs, joint ventures with builders across the United States. And they claim, and again, this is a lot of legend because we're in the 1950s and 60s, but they said back then that a non-compete was forever. So if you left home building, you were out forever. And as Art worked in these joint ventures, he thought there was a better way to do things for home builders. And the path back to home building, more home building proper, was to create the franchising business model. And so that was formed about 46 years ago. 1978, Art entered the franchising of home builders. That landed him on the cover of Builder Magazine, 1986 Builder of the Year, because it was a very fresh approach. Which was typical of Art. He was an innovator in many ways. He was credited with the first split bedroom floor plan, which if you don't follow home building, everybody has that today, where a primary bedroom is on one side and the secondary bedrooms are on the other and you see through the home. Until Art came along, that didn't exist. All bedrooms were on the one side and the home was very compartmentalized. He was the first person they claimed to open models to the public, fully furnished with the lights on all day long. In the 1980s, he wrote the first of its kind, we believe, Builder ERP. So talking about software, ERPs back then really didn't exist, certainly not in the construction space. There's a number of them that we all know today, but those things didn't exist. And those were just a few of the examples along the way where Art was at the front of home building and really built a business that allowed the small builder to scale a business. And because he was an innovator and he was a wild-eyed entrepreneur, as he met small builders that he really liked, he would really help put them in business and help them grow through best practices. And typically, home builder is a home builder, and they're good in, as they describe themselves, in home building, but they're not good in sales or marketing. They're not necessarily good in product, managing people. And so through our proprietary software, which we call Eris, the system was baked in. The AR way, as we call it, was baked into the software. So you just followed the software, and it would allow you to scale this business. And we had builders that scaled to quite large operations throughout Florida, certainly. Today, we operate in 10 states, 41 markets, top line sales revenue of about $500 million. With an average sales price of about 1.9 million plus land. So we're at the top of the pyramid in terms of where housing is. There's certainly stuff above us, but most of it sits below us. Still with the idea that we're developing tools that help the smaller builder scale a comfortable business. And Art passed away about 7 years ago. And at that point, family, the business transitioned to second generation ownership. And they began bringing in outside management. Art had run it from the day he created it until really the day he passed. And then we were tasked with professionalizing the organization and modernizing it in many ways, which is the journey that we've been on for the last few years. And really, I think, has us poised for the next, hopefully, 70 years of growth for our company. So that's a little bit about who we are and kind of where we've come from.
Thank you, Don. That's quite a history, I would even say.
That's
because
an impressive
where,
story.
where and when it started. I mean, I wasn't even born.
Yeah, right.
Long before that, that's my grandpa's times. And you kind of mentioned a couple of interesting things throughout that story of AR homes, because one of the next tangents we wanted to ask you is, what were the trends in the home buildings that shaped the AR homes today, and at the same time the impact of technology? And you kind of gave us the preview that you have proprietary software. So long story short, AR Homes seems to have lived through maybe even eras, multiple, in terms of, business eras, the technologies, the start of the technology as we know it today in the 90s, and then taking new waves decade after decade. What were the trends maybe like back in the day, but maybe even in the last 5-10 years that you've seen affect AR homes?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. So the impetus was art was a chemical engineer by education. And so you have I like to say, and I don't know this to be true, but the physical manifestation of his brain is our software. It's the way he thought about home building and best practices and systems. And so in its day, genius, as the market evolved, the software became quite rigid. And so at that time, there was nobody really competing in the software space with art. And this is back when they had terminals, dummy terminals, and they claimed that he would invite you into his office and he had a terminal and you sat next to him and he would have programmers right there. They were changing on the fly. He was very much an experimenter, if you will, in the technology, which was wonderful. What changed, I think, over time, pretty obviously, is a number of, as home building has grown into this very professional business, and you look at where the publics are, whether that's the Lennars or Beezers or whomever's, and there's a lot of technology that's flooded into that space. Even so, with the small custom builder who's been our client historically, and you'll edit out if you need to, but things like Builder Trend or Co-Construct, these are well-known small sort of web light type applications, but appropriate to the small builder contractor utilizing a pretty light end bookkeeping software tacked onto the end, right? So suddenly when that happens and venture capital or PE starts to flood that market, there's a proliferation of softwares. And that's where for us, when we looked at it, we said, we don't really know that we can or should compete in that space where it was a strategic differentiator for us for many years. Suddenly you have hundreds of software engineers and tens of millions of dollars flooding a space that a company our size probably shouldn't compete necessarily there. So the pivot that we saw was, number one, there's a lot of good software out there. There's a lot of best in breed. None of it fits our business because we're a franchisor, not a sort of home building per se. But the other part, as we looked at it, is the opportunity we now see is that the consumer wants to buy differently. So where we spent decades building for the builder, here's the tool for you, Mr. or Mrs. Builder. We now see, we think the real opportunity is to disrupt the front end of how the consumer will buy. And you had touched on, like, we've been here for sort of generations or eras. I think what we did really well was we sort of met the baby boomer at the very beginning of their journey. And they were looking for the small 3-bedroom ranch. And their lives changed through career advancement, the stock market, wealth accumulation. Wonderful. And as their housing needs changed and developed and grew, we went with them all the way. What we didn't do necessarily well, and what we're in the process of doing, is now coming back to the beginning of the line and trying to meet the generation of the millennials and the Generation X where they are, and looking at consumer data about how they really want to consume homes today or the product. And we think there's a real opportunity to build something unique again that will engage them and let people fight out the back end software of how do you order a 2x4.
I'll give it to Roman.
Thank you, Dan.
Because I see the eyes that want to ask a lot of questions.
I would like to go back to the consumer experience in a bit, but I would like to touch a little bit on the franchisees. I think it's a brilliant model. What I'm curious about is how do you maintain quality across your franchisees? And specifically, since we are a tech-focused podcast, what role does technology play in this process?
Yeah. So it comes down, quality really begins in the selection of the franchise partner. I mean, at the end of the day, we do a lot of work to vet the people that ultimately can buy a franchise. Typically in franchising, if you have the financial balance sheet and your territory is open and you want that, you can have the burger joint, right? That's the way franchising, and they sell a ton of burger joints. Our business is different because we have a man's legacy and a family's legacy tied to it that's been here for 70 years, especially in the heart of Florida. And so we say no way more than we say yes in order to do that. And then we do a lot of surveying of our customer along the journey. And so we can see how they respond at time of sale, but also a year later, right? Very typical home builder surveys. And we're collecting a lot of data around that. And then it's unfortunately, there's a lot of things about technology we can talk about, Roman, but the downside to home building is this huge, slow moving monolithic business. In a lot of ways, it doesn't want to change because it's making a lot of money. Look at the earnings calls. And so there's very little impetus to change that. And so, for us, it's a lot of this comes down to meeting the expectation. Quality is a funny word in custom home building. Some people see quality as 2x4s frame 16 on center. And some people view quality in the custom home world as I got the choices that I wanted of good products. And they don't care. It's interesting. They don't place as much value on the construction methodologies. So we look at all of that, and really it's about making a promise to the customer around high quality. We use a lot of visualization, so we can pretty well tell the customer what it's going to look like before it ever gets built, and then following through on our word to deliver that exact thing that we've promised them. And I think when that promise meets the reality, I think the consumer in the world of custom home building sees that as quality. And it's interesting because it's an imperfect product built by imperfect people. Like hundreds of people touch this
like everything,
home, right? It's definitely not productionized in any way. And so that's kind of how we see it. We see some opportunities. We see some opportunities around technology where we can sort of take as-built at various stages remotely, that we can understand how things are framed, what the finishes look like. But I think that kind of technology around putting a house on autopilot, especially at our price point, and it turns out perfect at the end and everybody's happy, is pretty far off for us.
Thank you for replying to this. Just to play it a little bit on top of that, is that real estate seems to be one of the last industries that on the path to digitalization, fintech and medical has been far ahead of that, and that's why we're so excited about this space, is that there's so much potential, there's so many things that could be done. And just to add on top of this, and I'm just curious, in the current economy of 2024, how does it impact your business, broadly speaking, and specifically in your technical R&D efforts? How does this economy impact your business, basically? Yeah.
So because of where our price point sits in the pyramid of sales, at $1.9 million plus lots, so you're $2.34 million on average across all markets, it's not a very rate sensitive buyer. Right. So interest rates, all the talk about rates going up and lately relaxing a little bit, hasn't really impacted our buyer much. They're much more market sensitive, and the stock market's been really strong. Mm-hmm. So those things are positive to our consumer directly. I think the other part is, I've been at this now almost 30 years in home building, and the American consumer is just an incredibly impatient animal, which is to our benefit, right? Because if they have wealth, they're going to spend it. They're not going to wait forever to get the thing they want. And so there just comes a point where the consumer bumps up against, I'm not waiting anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's expensive. I don't foresee it getting less expensive anytime soon. I don't see price relaxation on the horizon for us. And again, because we're not really rate sensitive at our price point, I don't necessarily feel like rates coming back down is going to change a lot for our consumer. So, in luxury, if you study the numbers and you can read all the analysts, luxury's been somewhat insulated, while the bottom part of the market has had quite a bit of volatility. If you look at what the nationals and publics have done, they've bought down interest rates, and they've been living in that environment for probably 18 months. So they're artificially lowering the cost of ownership by buying down the rate. Again, our consumer that doesn't resonate. So we don't get into those types of transactions. Many of our transactions are cash. So broadly, our business remains pretty stable. We see 25 being at a minimum flat. I think there's opportunity for growth actually in our segment, and that will depend on how some of our innovation work turns out. And then to answer your question, we budget for it. Like, we have to spend on technology. There's just no question, because again, if I'm right, if my theory is right about we met the boomers 45 years ago, we followed them through their life cycle. Economists will tell you the baby boomer ages out of the market by about 2040. So we're looking at a 15-year window, and that's a diminishing, right? It doesn't just one day it's gone. It diminishes over time, which means another segment has to fill that. So if I wait even 5 more years to solve for how the consumer wants to buy, we're really late. In fact, in some ways, I feel I'm late already. But that's really that's the impetus for us to push forward on finding new ways to engage the consumer to buy.
Love it. Thank you. And to continue on that topic of R&D and innovation, everyone talks about AI, and I feel like we have to talk about this as well. So in some sense, it's overhyped, but I still think that there's a lot of potential in the future, and there are some really great applications today. I'm just curious, what role do you think AI could play in custom home building, especially in design, personalization, automating routine tasks, and things like that? And are you using some of the AI today?
Yeah, we definitely are. We run a monthly, we call it Innovation Fireside Chat. And that allows anybody in our company to come to the conversation. You can be at a C-level, you can be individual contributor, and you can just say, hey, I've been messing around with, I observed this, I saw this thing, I want to talk about it. Partly it keeps me as CEO informed of all the different things our folks are working on besides the things that I want them to work on, which is helpful, but it also, they're going to enlighten us to things that we don't know about. So through that, we have seen some really interesting things around AI, where we think the most immediate, I would say, impact for residential construction. There's obviously what it's doing in marketing. A lot of people can see these things where it can write copy. That's already in use. Everybody, I think, at some level is using AI there. Where it gets interesting to me is the ability to quickly iterate, primarily around exterior elevations. It isn't yet to a place where it can do floor plans. We've tested it. There's still this human element of good design. I think there's a future where it can. I think we can get smart enough about it to get it to design homes that we would want to then use as a starting point. But from an exterior standpoint, the ability to ask it to show you iterations around maybe that's modern or contemporary or farm, at the golden hour with this type of lighting. We've seen it, done it. And so within 30 seconds, you're generating 4, 5, 6 ideas that you can further iterate. And I'm pretty confident at some point the consumer is going to bring it to us. Like, if we don't get out there and exercise this tool, the consumer is just going to show up with it.
I've seen maybe a dozen tools that do this already, where you can specify some parameters, what things you like, maybe even feed some of the examples to the AI, and it can spit up several examples. And I think for now it could be a starting point to say, hey, here's what we like, and eventually it might translate into actual specific designs or floor plans and things like that. I love the stuff that AI does today already.
Yeah, it's actually beautiful, a lot of it, because of the way that it can set the lighting and do some things that really engage the consumer. You know, what it doesn't do well is, you know, the chimneys floating out in space. You really can't build what it's showing you, but as professionals, we recognize that. And so, you know, that's the human element. It's the discovery. So it's in the conversation that you have with what do you really like about this? Can we draw those elements forward in your design? And we're seeing it, we're using it. I think the consumer is going to continue to push us to do it. So And if I'm a small builder, it's a couple things are interesting. Number one, if I'm a small builder, probably I don't even think about it. If I'm a public, I only build a few plans anyway. And in their normal market, they might build 7 to 10 plans. And this is the way they look, and they're approved for the community. We're not doing anything else anyway. So I don't know that they have the same interest in that for design, because they're not very design forward companies. They're more manufacturing if you think about the big publics. Mm-hmm. So it puts us in a really sweet spot where we can test it, and I think get a lot out of it as time goes on.
Got it. And just to wrap up with some of the innovation agenda, if you could implement a new software to improve AR homes processes, what would it be? What impact do you think it might have? You can freestyle on this and use your imagination. We're just curious what your goals would be, what your needs are.
Yeah. So I think where the greatest need in where custom home building has gone is the large communities are few and far between nowadays. So they used to be, again, go back in our history, what they would call the master plan community, 1,000 home sites, 3 golf courses, all these amenities. Florida's built on them up and down the coast. And they're throughout the United States. That has really fallen off after the downturn of 06 through 08. And I don't foresee that a lot of money is going to ever flood back to custom home development. So for the consumer today, it's really a lot about finding the home site they want. Oftentimes it's an urban infill site. It's walkable. It's close to the good school, restaurant, fill in the blank. And there's still pretty, to the consumer, there's a lot of mystery around that. How do I find it? What is it? Can I build on it? What are the extra costs to do that? Right? It's something that the consumer definitely has not been exposed to. So I think there's a technology piece, and I'd love to share it with you, but not on this podcast because I'd like to be first to get there. I think there's some real interesting ways between MLS feeds, zoning aggregators, and rules engines that you can really help the consumer find the place they want to live. And the consumer data for us that continues to come through is cash rich, time poor. And I think the other part is they really want to demystify custom home building. Mm-hmm. So if we can help them make better use of their time and take the mystery away from it. In fact, decades ago, art was credited with saying mystery is great for the theater, it's terrible for home building. That still rings true 70 years later. Mystery is terrible for home building. People don't want that ambiguous, what will this cost? How long does it take? You would not probably let anyone in your home to do a service with an open checkbook.
Yeah.
Right. When you're done, just tell me how much and I'll pay you. Nobody does that. And they shouldn't expect builders to be able to do that either. So for us, if we can solve those kinds of things, then the consumer journey gets a lot cleaner for them.
I love this in terms of making it basically a red, yellow, or green flag for the consumer, right? In terms of what I want to build and whether it's possible. We did work with some of the data aggregator companies in the past, Real Estate API, Lightbox, and they do provide a lot of the valuable data. And I think eventually in the future, if that could be narrowed down to specific parameters, hey, here's the parameters of the home, what can I build here? That could be a huge thing.
Yeah, we think so too. The other thing, and this is already a reality for us, which the cost of so the model home has been sort of the staple of the industry. You go visit a model home, walk through it, touch it, feel it, fall in love. To carry a $3 million home is expensive. And our models probably are in that average price point now because they sit above our typical transaction price because we do want to be aspirational. We want to inspire people to something even greater than maybe what they would build. It's kind of how home building works. But that $3 million carry over the course of a couple of years, it's a real challenge to the small builder and their business model. So we built an immersive theater in our St. Pete office where you can stand in it and have a home projected around you. And we're in the early stages of being able to select the finishes within that. And so that's in the early stages. I have a beta site. It's been well received. We'll probably roll that out to some other locations because we think that the consumer can get pretty far down the journey before they have to touch the physical stick and brick. And you can study the back end, the production of panels or modular. And millions, hundreds of millions of dollars have flooded into that, and it's pretty much failed every time. So somebody way smarter than me has to fix the back end. I'm just going to stay focused on the front end customer journey and then let all the money sort out how we're going to build them 40 years from now. So.
Love it. Rene, would you like to take it from here?
I'm just kind of listening in and thinking through some of the things that I wanted to ask, and like bit by bit, I'm already hearing some of these things from you, Don. We talked a little bit already about what the future might hold for both AR homes and even in the industry. We talked a little bit about kind of what is going to be the next move for the consumer, right? Are we right now in the time where we need to know what people want 10 years from now, or getting there? So through bits and pieces that we've already talked about in terms of the future, what do you think that future holds, whether it's 10 years from now or sometimes maybe even 5? Like right now we live in in the time where 5 years is long enough. What do you see that future holds for both home building in particular, and maybe even real estate at a larger scale?
Yeah. I think I've been over the last couple of years become pretty influenced by the paradox of choice. And it's fascinating study. And if you look at home building over the long term, especially custom building, the builder wants to compete by giving you more choice, right? So that's interesting, and it's worked. But the emerging consumer is telling us something very different, and that is there's a few things they really care about. We think like floors, countertops, cabinets. But they don't really care about toilet paper holders, like to give you the extremes. And what that means is that there's a real opportunity for custom homes to be redefined. And it can be redefined around a curated experience, which aligns much better to the paradox of choice, right? And the paradox of choice, too much choice, I'm destined to fail no matter what. There's too much. If I'm restricted, I can't really express myself the way I want to in this home. And here's the inside dirty secret. Almost every consumer builds the same home anyway. Like they saw the house down the street and they just picked the same stuff. It's a modern farm with white, and they have black windows and marble looking countertops, which is great. And they need to feel that way. So, I think as the consumer is telling us sort of they're open to that idea of curated experiences. What we have as an advantage is we have award-winning floor plans. We have statues and acrylics to line the walls of our St. Pete office forever. Our interior design is award-winning. So we have a lot of knowledge and experience around what the consumer wants in terms of the physical. So leveraging that and helping them understand, trust that it's okay to do that without picking toilet paper holders is an interesting place. Again, I don't see this getting less expensive anytime soon. Land is more difficult to acquire. You look at some of the nationals or publics are beginning to launch REITs. They're beginning to hold a lot of land off balance sheet. They're doing some really creative things because they need to fuel that machine. And if all that's true and it remains ultra competitive for land and other things, then buying deep in SKUs. So now we'll get into the operations side. Like if I can buy really deep in 5 cabinets versus 20 cabinets, I can buy really deep in 20 countertops, not 50 countertops, and the consumer will go along with that journey. Then you have the chance to really help the more people get to where they want to get, right? But it's going to take sacrifice. One, it's going to take a change in discipline or paradigm for builders. The unlimited isn't the move anymore, and the consumer then has to be willing to say, or we have to fulfill for them this feeling like I've personalized and expressed myself in such a way at $3 million, I found value. Because it's not a price buy. Like at this point, $3 million, it's not about price. If I save them $200,000, it doesn't matter. Because they're going to buy anyway.
It's really about the experience and just this is the thing that I wanted to live in. And you created something that I wanted. And as a consumer, they had the control in a way over the process.
And,
absolutely, and but it's creating this sort of this belief that they are accomplishing the things that they want to do, even though counter to the existing paradigm, we've restricted them in some ways, if that makes sense.
I've looked through your gallery and just wanted to say I would buy pretty much any home in your gallery. I love the designs.
Oh, thanks.
I love the looks. On the kind of the template side, how customizable are your templates on the website? How far you can go with the process of customization?
Yeah, we don't say no to anything. And that's good and bad. We also have a program by which we will start from a blank sheet of paper for you. So anything in there, and as I've described it for many years, it's finance and physics. And finance always runs out first. We can find a way to engineer almost anything you'll ask us to do, and we build some amazing, amazing homes. But that's also bad, because when you start getting into that sort of broad, open customization, the world is your oyster, that's where expectations don't get met. Because it's hard to forecast how expensive those changes really are. And then when you get the final, so I'll call it accounting of it, and you go, wow, that's $1 million more than I want to spend. Now we're outside of the price bands by which the luxury consumer will buy, because their behavior is pretty clear in the data. But you can get to a point where it's like, that's too much. I've gone over too significantly. But to your question, Roman, we'll do anything that you want. And I see probably for at least the next 15 years, our company running parallel paths. There's that sort of bespoke experience that anything you want, world's your oyster, and this development of this curated experience for generation X, millennial, and we think probably Z. I mean, there's just very few things, if you think about your life, that you can't configure to suit on your phone. Pizza, insurance, tires. I mean, Range Rover has a configurator out. Ferrari launched one 2 years ago. That's crazy. When I saw that, I was like, oh, they really believe that the consumer's willing to configure a handmade car. I don't know what the success rate was, but that sort of speaks to me that, wow, they even believe that that's what the consumer wants to do, which I would have never believed.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I think in terms of we're ready to wrap up. And one final question to you, Don, is how can our listeners learn more about AR homes and stay connected with your with what you do?
Yeah, thanks. That's an incredibly kind offer. Visit our website, like everybody, I suppose, right? arhomes.com, and that will give you the current of what's going on with our company in terms of product and where we build. And if you were so inclined to have an AR home, that's where you would find out about us. And then obviously social, right? You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, even, I guess. I have to get a TikTok, I've been told. I think I'm too old for TikTok, but that's where the consumer's moving. So I'm being told by my marketing department I have to get a TikTok. So all the normal places, Roman.
We're in the same spot. I don't have a TikTok, but I'm approaching a stage where I need to get one, especially with the podcast.
Yeah.
Don, thank you so much for your time. And Rene, maybe we have any closing comments, or Don, if you want to say anything.
Yeah, my closing comment was actually, Don, was there anything that you wanted to maybe, get off your chest for the audience on the intersection of that PropTech, real estate, various software, whether it's customizable or not? Was there anything that you wanted to talk about, but, our questions didn't give the room for that?
Yeah, I'd like to talk. There's one topic, and since we have a few minutes, one of the topics I really like to talk about related to innovation is we run an internal program for emerging leaders that we call Catalyst. So my educational background is in chemistry and mathematics, and ended up in home building. Go figure. But when I met our current leader for people ops in the interview process, I had told her I had this idea around emerging leader development. And she said, I've done that. And I was like, well, I've never. So that really sparked my interest in bringing Kelly Chicos on board. And so every year we run a cohort that lasts about 9 months, and it has 5 pillars. And, it's obviously got a book study and 360 reviews and philanthropy. But one of the things we do is a hackathon, to borrow from the technology world. We give that group of frontline individual contributors the opportunity to solve a real world business problem for us. And it's interesting because they don't have any budget responsibilities. They have no people management. These are really young, generally speaking, young individual contributors. some of the best ideas that we're working on today in our organization came right from the front line. And so as a leader, I would say to other leaders, there's real opportunity for the people who do the day job to inform you about what the need of the consumer is and how to fill it, which I think is really impactful. And I think that as a leader, if you're thinking about innovation, take the risk. As an organization, we got to a place where in Arts Passing, we didn't take a lot of risks. We didn't, as I call it, we didn't bet a lot of ponies. We just kind of stayed status quo. And through the Catalyst program, we were able to create some initiatives that I think are going to help us get back to that really leadership position in home building technology for custom home builders. And so I think this is geared towards leaders. It kind of speaks to who we are, the DNA of our company, and why somebody might want to be aligned with us. So that could be a franchisee or a homeowner. But I would just say to other leaders out there, take the risk, listen to the people at the front line doing the job, empower them to actually live it all the way through, which is how we built our immersive theater. They presented their hackathon. It was a really clever idea. And then we funded it. And to your question, Roman, are you spending? We said, yeah, in this budget, the next fiscal year, we actually gave them a full-on budget, and they created their own go-to-market, their own marketing strategy, picked their own tech vendor, built it out in our space, managed the whole project. And even if it never goes anywhere, the opportunity for your team to learn in that real-world environment has been really beneficial to us as a company. So for a leadership tip, I would say that's a great way to go about innovating.
I love this.
That's an amazing idea.
This sounds very impressive, and I'm just wanted to congratulate you on this. It is something that I think resonates with us a lot, and we would love to share some of our experience if there's anything that we can help with. And we'll make sure to attach some of the links in the description to the program. And if there's anything that we can help you with in that sense, we would love to do that.
Thank you.
That very much resonates with our values as well.